Hello and welcome to the Hammer Museum. Tonight's program we're calling Beyond Baroque and Beyond. We're examining the rich history of the Los Angeles literary organization Beyond Baroque, which has been a fixture for experimental writing and publications for over 50 years. Tonight's program is part of a series of programs related to the Hammer's biennial Made in LA, currently on exhibition. This is the fifth iteration of Made in LA, co-curated by Miriam Ben Salah, Lauren Mackler, and Ike Onyueni, and it's presented at both the Hammer and at the Huntington in Pasadena as a mirror exhibition. Beyond Baroque is an independent literary arts center and public space dedicated to expanding the public's knowledge of poetry and literature and art through cultural events and community interaction. It was founded in 1968 as an experimental literary magazine, and it's now based in a beautiful building in Venice, California, where they offer a diverse variety of literary and arts programming, including readings and workshops. Throughout the years, Beyond Baroque has played muse to the Venice Beats, the burgeoning punk movement, and innumerable visiting writers and scholars. It's home to the longest-running free poetry workshop in Los Angeles, and on weekends presents poetry readings and performance art events. Since its inception, Beyond Baroque has offered writers a place to read their work and get feedback and support from other writers, and it's been instrumental in launching the careers of many artists of all ilks. As part of this year's Hammer Museum Biennial, the curators have invited writer and curator Sabrina Tarasoff to participate. Her research over the past couple of years has focused on a group of poets who gathered around Beyond Baroque, and you can see the physical manifestation of her work in an installation on view at the Huntington from now until August 1st. The installation contains a series of rooms which capture the ethos of Beyond Baroque in an unacademic, unconventional, experimental, and experiential form that incorporates archival materials and ephemera, as well as fictionalized tableaus based on the works of Dennis Cooper, Bob Flanagan and Sherry Rose, Amy Gerstler, Jack Skelly, Ed Smith, and David Trinidad. For this series of programs, Beyond Baroque and Beyond, we're focusing on a group of writers who were very active in Beyond Baroque from 1980 to 1986. And we've invited one of them, Tosh Berman, to moderate a series of conversations to reflect on what Beyond Baroque meant to them. Tosh was the artistic director and curator of Beyond Baroque from 1993 to 1996. And prior to that, he curated a film series there for 5 years. Today, he's a writer and the publisher of Tam Tam Books. He's the author of 3 books himself: Tosh, Growing Up in Wallace Berman's World, and Sparks-tastic, 21 Nights with Sparks in London, and a book of poems, The Plum in Mr. Blum's Pudding. In the 1980s, Tosh hosted a public access television show called Tea With Tosh, with guests such as Philip Glass, Frank, Peter Case, Russ Tamblyn, and Bruce Conner. So for this biennial, we invited Tosh to come back to the role of moderating and host a series of 3 programs discussing Beyond Baroque at various periods in its history with some of the people at its core. Tonight, Tosh will be in dialogue with 3 other writers and former Beyond Baroque leaders, Dennis Cooper, Amy Gerstler, and Benjamin Weissman. So I'll give you a little background on each of them and then turn it over to Tosh. Dennis Cooper is a prolific artist who works in a variety of forms and media since the 1970s. He's been a punk poet, a queercore novelist, a transgressive blogger, and an indie filmmaker. In 1976, he founded Little Caesar Magazine and Press, which he ran until 1982. From 1980 to 1983, he was Beyond Baroque's director of programming. And during this time, he organized innumerable events as part of their Friday night readings, where he gathered an unlikely group of writers, musicians, and artists. He then left LA for New York and later Amsterdam, where he began writing a sequence of 5 interconnected novels called The George Miles Cycle, in addition to innumerable other projects. And today he spends his time between Los Angeles and Paris. Amy Gerstler is a poet who has published 13 award-winning books of poems, and her work appears in a variety of magazines and anthologies, including The New Yorker, The Paris Review, The American Poetry Review, Poetry Magazine, several volumes of Best American Poetry, and the Norton Anthology of Postmodern American Poetry. Her most recent book is Index of Women. She's been a very active part of Beyond Baroque since the early 80s and has served in various capacities there as librarian of the Small Press Library, then as assistant director, and then later as acting director of Beyond Baroque. Benjamin Weissman is the author of 2 books of fiction, most recently Headless. He teaches art and writing at UCLA and Otis College of Art and Design and is represented by the Pitt in Glendale. He was the director of Beyond Baroque's reading series for 10 years, from 1983 to 1993. And from 2002 to 2012, he curated the Hammer Museum's literary series, New American Writing. So we are delighted to bring this poet gang back together again. Please join me in welcoming Tosh Berman, Dennis Cooper, Amy Gerstler, and Benjamin Weissman.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome Amy Gerstler, welcome Benjamin Weissman, and welcome Dennis Cooper. We have something in common, and this is sort of a historical importance to me to be in this one platform at this same time, not the same place because we're in different places, but at least three of us share a certain duty at Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center at one time. All three of us were program directors or curators or presenters, or I'm not sure what the exact term was. Is it just programmer, curator?
Literary god.
Ah, that's it. That's it. So us literary, well, actually four literary gods, because Amy is obviously a god. Without
No, I'm a devil.
That's true.
That will come out within the next 45 but this is very unusual, where we could share experiences and share our history in this sorts, because we do have a history that we share. Not exactly the same time. First was, in my world, there was Dennis, and then Benjamin, and then I came after Benjamin. And Amy was all throughout that whole period. She's sort of a witness of that whole time, in a sense, as well as being a participant in the Beyond Baroque and writing Los Angeles community of the time and elsewhere. And I want to ask all three of you, when is the first time, or you heard the words Beyond Baroque, or the first time you visited Beyond Baroque? Do you remember because I can't remember personally when I first went to Beyond Baroque, but I was wondering if the three of you remember.
My memory, and Amy will have to correct this if I'm wrong. My memory is because I became friends with Amy because we both went to Pitzer College.
Oh.
And my memory is that Amy and I heard about Beyond Baroque, and we drove out to Venice when it was on Abbot Kinney, and went to a reading there. And I don't remember who the reading was, who the main person of the reading was. Perhaps Amy does. But it was like an open reading and then a reading by a main person. And then I think we went back maybe a couple other times too, to when it was at Abbot Kinney, just to go see readings.
And did you, Amy, do you have any memory of that day or that evening?
I think what Dennis said is absolutely correct. And it might have been Jim Crusoe reading with maybe another person. And open readings before. I think that was the format then. And it was in that funny little sort of storefronty, almost like a shotgun apartment room. And I can't remember whether there were some people sitting on the floor and some people sitting on chairs. It was very informal. And I think that was maybe the second reading I'd ever been to in my life.
Wow. And Benjamin, did you ever go to the old location of Beyond Baroque?
Yeah, I went to the Abbot Kinney place where Jim was hosting an open reading, and I, might have been 18 or 19, I think. And before I went to Cal Arts, and just saw an open reading there and was completely excited by the dangers involved with that.
Mm-hmm. Jim Crusoe is one of my favorite writers. He's actually a phenomenal figure in the Beyond Baroque history as well. So many people don't get mentioned in the Beyond Baroque history overall, just because there's so many interesting people involved. Some people just don't get the attention. Hopefully, I'll bring some of the attention to some of the people who are not overlooked, but maybe not talked about as much. But I feel they're kind of important. And definitely, when I think of Beyond Baroque, I think I first went to Beyond Baroque in not Abbot Kinney, but I think in the location it is now on Venice Boulevard. And it has to be a Dennis-related event of some sort or some reading. And maybe this is actually see Dennis read. I can't remember thoroughly. But Dennis, how did you become a program director at Beyond Baroque? What was the process in that?
I was, I was doing this magazine and press called Little Cesar.
Yes.
And I found out about the typesetting facilities at Beyond Baroque. So I was going there to typeset and lay out the magazine and the books because because it was a cool place to do it and it was cheap. And so I met Jack Skelly there, and I was around a lot, and they Manazar, who was running Beyond Baroque, and Jocelyn Fisher, who was his assistant, they liked me and thought I was like an energetic young fella. Mm-hmm. And so they just, I don't know, they called me to the office one day and said, do you want to run the Friday Night Reading Series? And Bob Flanagan was running it at the time. And I don't know, it just seemed like, wow, that's kind of a cool idea. So I just said, sure. And yeah, I just took over. So, I mean, it was, but they knew me because I was there a lot, doing the typesetting, and also I was going to readings and things.
So you knew when you took the job, you already you actually knew the culture of Beyond Baroque at the time.
A bit, yeah.
So was there any surprising aspects of your job that you didn't expect of being a program director at Beyond Baroque at the time?
Hostility.
That sounds kind of weird, right, Benjamin? You're kind of paranoid, Dennis.
No, I mean, I knew, I think I was friends with Bob at that point. And I sort of got what was going on. It's just that I changed, I took the open readings out and we moved them to Sundays, and the readings just became readings and different things like that. And no, I mean, I knew they had almost no money, and I knew that if I wanted to get writers from other cities and other places to come, which I really, really wanted to, I would have to basically say like, hey, you want to come to LA and hang out and then maybe do a reading while you're here for $200? Mm-hmm. So that part was, that was that. I don't know. It was a lot. I mean, it was a lot of work. Maybe it was a little more work than I thought it would be, but it was pretty easy. I don't know. I mean, other people didn't like what we were doing,
Mm-hmm. At the time, probably to this day, especially, I could be totally wrong about this, but like poetry of the 60s, the 70s and onward became very tribal-like. Mm-hmm. I don't even know why it's tribal, but that was just the case. It became sort of like actual gangs of sorts. There's the Venice beat scene, right. And then there's sort of like the language poets or the more experimental poets, and they all had their own publications and zines and stuff. Right. And then there's the Beyond Baroque world is sort of filtered through for you at the time and Benjamin later. And Benjamin, Dennis, were you both conscious of bringing a certain style or aesthetic onto the Beyond Baroque platform?
Well, I think for me, prior to me, it was concentrated on poetry. And then so I just brought in a lot of fiction to mix in with poetry. And that was also received, I guess, a mixed reception. Some people were like, and I also really wanted to carry on what Dennis was doing as far as like lots of international people, or at least lots of people from elsewhere. And so that remained a problem for locals that treated Beyond Baroque like a rec room that was, just a sign-up place and nothing more.
You bring go ahead, Amy. Oh, what did you say? Go ahead.
Oh, I just think another thing that happened both during the time that Dennis was running the reading series, and then when Benjamin was, that I personally feel like benefited my education greatly, as did so many things at Beyond Baroque, and as have so many things from knowing Dennis from the young age I did, and then knowing Benjamin later, was that both Benjamin and Dennis have a big interest in and interaction with other arts besides the literary arts, and that Jack Skelly curated music at Beyond Baroque at different times, but both Dennis and Benjamin had a lot of friends in the art world. And so not only did they start showing up at readings and being part of the kind of bubbling cauldron of the scene there, but they started sometimes participating in events or having performances or things like that. So that's one thing that both Benjamin and Dennis, I think, brought to Beyond Baroque that for me made it an even better kind of and more interactive kind of arts education and place to be and place to meet other artists, possibly to collaborate with and stuff like that. That was really important. I wouldn't have known it at the time or predicted, but that made a big difference to me. It made it like going to a big art school or something.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
I don't know if either of them agree with that or one.
Yeah, no, I mean, partly it was lucky timing because there was this kind of generation of students at Cal Arts who were visual artists, and Benjamin was part of that started coming to Beyond Baroque. Like Mike and Jim Iserman and Larry Pittman and Chris Williams and Steve Prina, and they would come to Beyond Baroque events. And through them, I mean, then we started going to Lace events, which was their scene. And there was this very great mix of kind of stuff. So that really colored very much like what Beyond Baroque was doing, because there was a huge amount of visual art input and influence on the programming and on our work and everything. So, but that was because there was just this amazing amount of time. It was a great time at Cal Arts, especially where they were interested in literature, luckily for us. So,
Benjamin wants to say something.
I just wanted to add to that I think that dovetails with what the helterskelter show. And so when that big Paul Schimmel exhibition was at MoCA, they did their catalog was very like literary minded, and they had a whole section of like poetry and fiction that you would never see in a museum catalog today.
We're going to have a helterskelter images coming up shortly. So that's interesting. For me, being an outsider, a person who went to Beyond Baroque on a semi-regular basis, I always felt the Dennis years were definitely like poetry orientated. And what you brought up, Benjamin, you did bring up a lot of fiction or new fiction or experimental fiction into the mix. And that's one thing that I feel was your contribution to the Beyond Baroque. That it's very interesting. As a writer myself, Beyond Baroque made me think about writing and think about making a publication of sorts. And Dennis, I feel I share with Dennis that like a show and tell thing. I brought this up before again and again, but when I was a kid, I loved taking things from home and showing it to my fellow classmates in front of the teacher, in front of an audience. I love doing that. So everything I've done, including the writing and the Tea With Tosh show and Tosh Talk thing, it's always really just basically a show and tell. Like, this is what I'm interested in, and I want to share that with you. And I feel, Dennis, that we share that quality, that certain aspect. And for me, it was great to see somebody else who does the same thing or on the same plane. And Benjamin, you're the first person I've actually, when I started reading your work and seeing you read, I actually wanted to be a writer. When I looked at you, I said, I want to be Benjamin. And
you have to get a hoodie, though.
Well, not only that, but I actually wanted to marry you, Amy. I want to do the whole Patricia Highsmith, Tom Ripley. I'm just joking about that, but really,
that's your next novel, Tosh. That's the plot. But I really, when I'm reading Benjamin's work and seeing you read, I want to do that. It's not like we share a aesthetic, but me enjoying your work so much, and that you're a writer, and plus you have this, you had a visual art aspect, which I do just by family reasons. It really, really spoke to me. And then when I became a director at Beyond Baroque, it's that point when I decided to actually become a publisher with Tam Tam Books. So that's how Beyond Baroque sort of made me what I am today. Dennis, did Beyond Baroque bring
anything, I mean, besides meeting other people and other writers and poets, did it make you feel like you should make a book, or did Beyond Baroque itself made you want to do something beyond this being a presenter at that time?
Well, I was already doing Little Caesar Press.
Right.
I mean, it may have kicked it into high gear because it became very ambitious. I did these, tons of books, and especially in lots of things. And I met a lot of writers through Beyond Baroque that I ended up publishing. So there was that. But it definitely had an impact in that sense. But I was always like the super go. I was always just like someone who did all kinds of stuff. I wasn't. Right. So I don't know. I don't know that Beyond Baroque made me want to publish books or do whatever. But yeah, there was because I would try to bring in. There'd be like, writers I respected. I was really the New York School poet, so I would try to have as many of them as possible come, for instance. Right. But then there were these young writers who I would meet often through Little Caesar, and then I would say, oh, let's, you guys come out and read, and and it would contribute to everything, really. We'd all become friends and kind of enlarge our gang to this kind of like national kind of thing, and then I would publish them, and the Little Caesar and Beyond Baroque were very connected. There was a strong connection between what I was doing in Little Caesar and what was happening at Beyond Baroque.
Jack, and when I talked to Jack and Jack Skelly and David Trinidad, previous Hammer Museum chit chat, they both brought up the idea. They both brought up the concept very strongly that they feel like there's the gang, there's like the Dennis Cooper gang. And I was aware of that, of sorts, and I know it was like Ed Smith was part of it, and Amy and so on. But did that gang aspect help you bring in attention from New York, for instance? Like sometimes you need a movement of some sort to get attention from other people. And was that where you're conscious of that, or was this a social thing, or?
Well, I don't know that in itself like brought people in, but when they came, they would become our friends. We would hang out and party with them. And, in that sense, like it was more like when they got here, then we would all become really great friends. And there was this kind of social world for them to enter and to kind of refresh and enliven our social world. But I don't know that, I don't know. I think the gang thing is kind of retrospective. There were a bunch of us that hung out together a lot, and we did stuff together Beyond Baroque and elsewhere. But I don't remember. We didn't like think of ourselves, and like maybe I didn't think of us as like a gang or a group or anything like that at all. I just thought we were just happened to be the people who were good friends and who were interested in a lot of the same things and were young, ambitious writers.
So no membership card.
No, I don't remember.
Whereas or secret handshakes or clubhouses, like a tree house that y'all meet, or?
Sherry Rose's house was kind of a tree house, kind of like the tree house in a way.
About that. So Dennis, when you left Beyond Baroque, I don't want to get personal because I don't know any stories really. I haven't heard anything. But how did from you leaving Beyond Baroque and Benjamin got the next job? What was the bridge, or how did that happen? Or Benjamin, do you know, or Amy?
I remember Dennis just sort of saying, either Dennis saying, let Benjamin do it, or that Jim Crusoe suggested it, or I think that at the very beginning when I started, Jack and I did it together. Uh-huh. So maybe that's what Dennis recommended, and it was nice. It was like in the days where you didn't even have to apply for a job. It was just like kind of offered to you. And then Jack and I did it for a little while, and I don't really know the reason, but I think Jack splintered off relatively quickly. And then I just did it alone for 10 years.
And how long were you in position, Dennis, as the reading coordinator?
I think only 3 years.
I'm a 3-year person myself.
I think it was 80 to 80.
Tosh, it should really be noted what beautiful style you brought to the readings. And I adored coming to your readings, and it felt like, you were really like suave, and you just brought great style, and just had great ideas. And you had a kind of manner that neither Dennis or I were close to having. And anyway, I really enjoyed like how you know, your the clothes you wore and the things you said.
You did a lot of film screenings.
Yeah.
Well, thankful to Benjamin, I brought the ideal to Benjamin to do a film series at Beyond Baroque, and I'm going to show a flyer from in our presentation. But the reason I did the film series at Beyond Baroque is because overall I want to do a film series in a literary setting. I know Beyond Baroque literary art, even though they had a visual aspect and stuff, I wanted to do a film series for writers and poets. Because I don't want to do it for a film organization. I want to do it for a literary organization. And that was sort of my main thought of doing the film series. And when I approached Benjamin about it, and some others, but mostly it's Benjamin who was very improving and actually very encouraging to do this series. So thank you, Benjamin, for that.
I wanted to mention two things that amused me at the time and amuse me in retrospect about Dennis and Benjamin's kind of proactive agitprop, if that's the right word, like not only being productive as artists, but being really ingenious about getting their work out into the world. And in Dennis's case, getting other people's work out into the world. I remember when Dennis was doing Little Caesar magazine, there was a very cool independent bookstore called Papa Box, which doesn't exist anymore. But in order to try and figure out how to distribute the Little Caesar magazine, sometimes we'd go on a little mission, which was the opposite of shoplifting. And we'd walk in because he was a little like not sure if they would start, taking the magazine and selling it there. So we'd sneak in and he'd have Little Caesars like down his pants, and we'd go in and look around and maybe buy a couple things, shop stuffing. Yeah, Benjamin says in the chat. And he'd actually put the magazines in the little magazine section rather than taking something out by shoplifting. It was like additive shop stuffing, and it worked. And then I think
no barcodes back then, so you could do
nothing
that.
like that, no scanners, no nothing. And I think after a while he approached them at the front desk and said, "Hey, would you carry this magazine?" And they were didn't they say something like, "Oh yeah, we love this," or "You've been sticking this in here," or "Don't we carry it already?" or something like that. And then Benjamin did this. I think the first time I ever saw Benjamin's work was when he used to do these prose poem, like one-page fiction texts. And I don't know what medium that was, but they were like posters and they just started appearing around. Did you do that at CalArts first?
Yeah, there was like a blueprint machine, and you could kind of just make posters like it was a giant Xerox machine, but it printed like with ink. And you could, just do that in the middle of the night for free.
And there'd be these super strange, super interesting, like short stories that were like one paragraph long that were big, that suddenly started appearing around and was like, what is this?
Great. It's probably a good time for us to show slides now. So Joe, can you put up the first slide?
I also thought one tiny thing that Dennis, I think, made an important link, which was like that I think that through Dennis's energy and communication with New York poets, the St. Mark Church sort of became our like sister headquarters in New York. And that was, I think, a big deal, that we became very aware of each other and kind of shared a lot of the writers. And then
the St. Mark's Poetry Project there.
Yeah. And I think that strengthened both places a lot.
Well, that was kind of a goal, really. I mean, that was like the model, St. Mark's, because that's where all the New York School poets came out of, I think. So, I mean, there was definitely an idea of like, let's be like that, because nothing like that in LA. There was, LA poetry was not much known outside of Los Angeles at that point. There was very little. And it was like, let's do this. And it worked. I mean, and then they became a kind of, like you said, a kind of sister organization. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And Joe, can we have the first slide? The first issue of Little Caesar, I presume?
Yeah.
And Dennis, where did you get the idea of doing a publication? I mean, what made you do this first issue, for instance?
I had gone to England and Europe the summer before I started this, and it was punk, and there were all these punk zines, and I was really, really energized by the punk thing. This is like 1976, so it was like very, very beginning of it. And I was just kind of like totally blown away by zines, you know, like that there were all these great punk zines, like, you know, Sniffing Blue and all these ones, right. Punk Magazine, and there were a bunch. So I just thought, you know, just to be interesting to do a poetry magazine that had that kind of energy or something, and that kind of tried to reach out to a kind of zine world, where people would be excited about it, or, you know, they would want to find out about the poets the same way they wanted to find out about the bands, you know. And
Jack Skelly helped you typeset, or he did the typesetting for the?
No, I did everything.
Oh, was this okay? So did you do this at Beyond Baroque?
This one was done on a typewriter. This is before Beyond Baroque. This one was done on this friend of mine's typewriter. It's typewritten.
Because I never actually seen this copy before, and you know,
it's super early. Yeah.
Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, this is Amy Gerstler's Yonder book. Amy, is this your first book?
Yes.
And is this published by Little Caesar?
Yeah.
Yes.
And can you give some background, Amy, about your first book right here?
Well, I was very young, and I had known, as Dennis mentioned, Dennis since I was 17, because we met at sort of the beginning of undergrad school for me, and that was a complete meeting. Dennis like completely changed my life. I mean, I give this little, I say this sometimes because it's completely true, so I hope it doesn't embarrass Dennis, but meeting Dennis was like one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, and made it so that I could be a writer. I met him early in college when my father sort of had me talked into the idea that the only kind of way to be an artist was that it was a hobby, and that it couldn't be a career or a way of life. And I was hungry for something and looking for something, and I kind of didn't know what it was. And then I met this guy who was like, no, art is your religion, and I am devoted to poetry, and you haven't read Rimbaud. Here's 5 books in different translations by Rimbaud. And if you want to be an artist, you have to work all the time, and you have to be devoted to it, and you have to read all the time, and you have to be curious about the world, and you have to be on fire. And that's okay. That's not shameful. And you have to cultivate your obsessions. And this kind of blew my mind, and I started trying to write. And then after a few years, Dennis started Little Caesar, and I was lucky enough to have him. This is a chapbook. It's you know, a little stapled book, but it was one of the most thrilling things that had ever happened to me, that I could actually have a little book in the world. And Dennis made that possible for a lot of people.
Dennis, did you approach Amy to do a chapbook, or Amy, did you approach Dennis, or was this
I'm sure I approached her. She would never have asked to do a book. I'm sure I just said to Amy, it's time, you should do a book or something.
Yeah, he said, I think you're ready.
Yeah.
Great. And who did the cover for the book?
Those are photographs by this photographer who we used to hang around with, who was very cool, named Judith Spiegel.
Oh, yeah. Great. Can we have the next slide, please?
Yeah, Monsters.
Monsters by Jack Skelly. And Dennis, this is also a Little Caesar publication, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And is this, how many books were published by Little Caesar? Not your magazine, but the actual publication books.
23, I think.
Quite a lot at the time. And I know you met Jack at Beyond Baroque, because he was doing his typesetting role. When did you discover him as a poet, especially as a poet that you would want to publish?
Probably around that time. I mean, we were friendly, and I was there. You know, when you're there typesetting and laying out, you're there all a lot of time.
Right.
So I'm sure we talked, and he probably showed me. He was making these little pamphlets.
Mm-hmm.
these really cool little pamphlets that had poems, and they were kind of heavily designed and stuff. And he was doing those pretty early on, and I loved them. I think that's how I discovered his work, is that these he did maybe 5 or 6 of them, as I recall, these little pamphlets like Whammo Blammo. I think these funny names.
And is each poet and Little Caesar, are they responsible for the cover? Like they choose the artist, or did you choose the design?
It depended. Sometimes the writers had something they wanted on the cover. I guess that was normally the case. Right. And I would do whatever they wanted. And sometimes they didn't have any ideas, so I would put something on the cover for them.
What's your typical edition run for a Little Caesar book at the time?
At first I did 100 the first few books. Mm-hmm. And then I think as it went on, I think the most I did 1,000. But by the time it was sort of later in the publishing, it was 1,000.
Can we have the next slide, please? And this is Lewis McAdams, a very well-known Los Angeles figure, poet, as well as I live very close to the Los Angeles River here, and that has Lewis's presence greatly. Actually, there's actually like an old-fashioned statue, a statue of a writer or a political figure. There's actually a Lewis McAdams statue. Where did you meet Lewis McAdams? Was it through Beyond Baroque?
No, I knew his poetry because he was sort of tangentially related to the New York school poets. Uh-huh. There was this anthology called the New York Poets or something like that, and it was edited by Joe Brainerd and by Ron Padgett and David Shapiro. And I think Lewis was in there. Oh. And that book was like my Bible for a long time. And so I knew his poetry, and I think I just wrote to him. He also had run the San Francisco Poetry Center for a long time. Oh. So we kind of bonded over that because he did that. But I think I wrote to him, and he moved to LA. Mm-hmm. And I think I knew he was in LA. I was just like, oh, Lewis McAdams. So I should, I think I had him come read. Mm-hmm. And then, we got to be friends, and I ended up publishing him.
Great. Okay, next slide, please. The legendary, the great, one of my favorites, Joe Branard. How did you connect with Joe for this book? And this is another Little Caesar publication.
I was a huge, huge fan of his, and I just started writing to him. And I just, and he would send me some poems and drawings. He gave me some poems and a series of drawings for the magazine. Mm-hmm. And then at some point I said, I would really love to do a book by you if you ever feel like it. And sure enough, he did. And he had this beautiful cover he made. And it was his last ever book. He quit writing after that book. So, and it's a fantastic book, fantastic book. But, so it was just this lucky break for me. Yeah.
Joe has a strong influence on a lot of writers, including me. Like when I was writing my memoir, I thought about I Remember book a lot. That was sort of not my platform, but I feel if I didn't read that book, my book would be a totally different book of some sort. So really, his writing really affected me, and I think a lot of other writers.
He's a great writer.
And next slide, please. Uh-huh. Amy, is this okay? This is Christie's Alpine Inn, and Amy, can you tell us about this book? Is this published by Little Caesar?
No, it's Sherwood Press. David Trinidad started a press, and they published. I was fortunate enough to have. This is also a really little chapbook that sort of red that you can see where where it would be. They're actually sewn with red thread. David and I sat around for 2 days sewing these books.
and David's press happened at exactly the same time as the Little Caesar press. I mean, all this stuff was happening reasonably the same time, correct?
I think it was a little later, his Sherwood
A little later?
press.
Okay.
Is that your memory, Benjamin or Dennis?
Yeah.
And can we have the next slide, please? Snap. This is your publication, Amy, correct?
I did it with a partner, Lori, and it was very short-lived. But I tried to do a magazine too. I wasn't very good at it, but it was a good experience.
Did you do more than one? I couldn't find another issue online of Snap.
I think there were two, but I don't have yeah, I believe there were two, but I probably have the worst memory of all four of us. So
nice cover. I don't recall ever seeing the magazine for some reason.
There are good reasons for that.
Okay. Perhaps I should say next slide then.
Yeah.
Next slide. Ah.
Yay!
I want to give a standing ovation for this book, but I'm not wearing any pants, so that's why I can't stand up. But Benjamin, this is the book that actually made me think about myself. I could do a short story, or I can do this, I think. And Benjamin, this is I know this was published by High Risk Books, which was Ira Silverberg's press, and
it was through Serpent's Tail.
Serpent's Tail. And so, Benjamin, how were the stories written during the Beyond Baroque years, or was it afterwards, or?
Oh, I think that they started for sure at that time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what was the process of you getting published by Ira? I mean, was there just by chance, or did you approach him, or did Ira approach you, or?
I mean, I was, writing fiction among a lot of poets, mm-hmm. Dennis and Amy and others, and, strongly, encouraged by them and showing them almost everything I wrote, or got to do readings where that happened. And, Ira was Dennis's agent. Uh-huh. And then Ira sort of developed a kind of another professional aspect, which was maybe becoming a publisher or an imprint of a bigger press. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden he said, I think he knew of my writing, and then said, do you have a manuscript? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, I do. And it was kind of simple like that.
Right. Ira seems to sort of was in tune with the Beyond Baroque world at that time, or Beyond Baroque was in tune to Ira's world. There's definitely, when I see a High Risk book, I immediately think of Beyond Baroque, just automatically, not thinking about it for some reason. Is that accurate?
I didn't meet him until long after I was at Beyond Baroque.
Oh.
Yeah.
Huh.
He was William Burroughs's, whatever. We're connected with William Burroughs and then with Kathy Acker.
I see.
So I knew them through that.
Okay, next slide, please. This book I never seen, Dennis. I seen the cover, but I never actually seen a copy. Who published this book?
That was David's Press.
Sherwood Press.
Yeah.
And is this poetry, or was this sort of?
No, it was my first fiction book. It's like a prose poem, but it's really fiction. It ended up being the center section of this novella called Safe. That was sort of my first novella.
So that's where this text exists now in the Safe.
Yeah.
Context.
Yeah, it's the first fiction I ever wrote that's any good, and I still like it, which is pretty amazing. But it's the first thing I actually feel like I was okay. This is where I actually became a decent writer.
Who took the photograph, the portrait of you?
Sherry Rose.
Ah. Sherry did a lot of photographs of that time period of all the participants.
Yep.
She served the not Paul McCartney's like I was thinking of like the Beatles in Hamburg. I forgot the photographer.
Oh, Astrid, whatever her name is.
She's the Astrid of Beyond Baroque.
All right.
Next slide, please.
Annie Leibovitz, actually.
Annie Leibovitz, okay. Right. Tenderness of Wolves, I remember greatly. Who published this particular book?
It's called The Crossing Press. It doesn't exist anymore. I think they were in Northern California.
And was this published during your time when you were a director at Beyond Baroque, or was this afterwards?
Yeah, it was like 1981, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's pictures. I think the pictures are portraits. It's of portraits of Arthur Rimbaud on the wall.
It's Robert Bresson. Uh-huh. And Arthur Rimbaud and Robert Peace, the last victim of John Wayne Gacy.
Very close subject matters.
That's my bedroom. People always think it's a gallery. That's next to my bed.
That's your bedroom.
That's my bedroom, yeah.
It reminds me of when I visit Sayagawa, the Japanese cannibal. He has a similar room. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is a very interesting cover to me. Can you explain why you have this gentleman on the cover, Little Caesar, if you can remember?
I have no idea. For the first 2 issues, I was co-editing with this guy named Jim Glazer. And it's called Little Caesar because he insisted that we had to have the name of a noir film as the name of the magazine. And this was the only title that had like a double entendre, kind of like meta quality. Because, he wanted to call it The Big Sleep. And I'm like, no, we're not going to call it The Big Sleep. So Little Caesar, I'm like, oh, Little Caesar, that's self-reflexive, It's quite possible that he put that on there. I have no idea why I put him on there. It seems completely a bizarre decision and makes no sense to me.
Maybe that's why I like it. It made me like pause and think about it.
Yeah.
Often at 4 o'clock in the morning, I can't sleep. I think about this cover.
Okay, good. Yeah.
And I never, this sounds idiotic because I am a sort of a film fan. I never thought of Little Caesar, the title of your publication, tied in with the movie. I did not make that connection till you mentioned it now.
Yeah, at least you didn't tie it in with the pizza parlor. That's like.
No, I did.
Did you take it from the pizza parlor? I'm like, this was years before that fucking pizza parlor. Oh my God.
You'd be happy to know that I never made that
parlor. I mean, Jesus.
You'd be very happy to know I never made that connection.
Okay, good.
Ever. Next, please. Next slide, please. More, and this is the great, one of my favorite people is John Weiner's poet, who actually babysat me.
Oh, wow.
Numerous times in San Francisco.
Was he a good babysitter?
I'm here, and I'm reasonably sane, so I think he was pretty good. He was very close friends. He lived with us in San Francisco on Scott Street in like 1958, 59, 1960. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, he was very. My father would be upset sometimes because John would bring in strangers into the household, people he meet, and my dad was convinced that half of them were narcs or cops of some sort. That was his main fear. But John was a very sweet person. John, to this day, has a really strong tie to writers now and poets now. I mean, his name comes up consistently when people speak about their favorite poets or writers, and he just has that presence. And what a great issue, because you have John Weiner's, Joe Branard, and The Quick on all one issue.
And Robert Creeley.
Robert Creeley. Amazing issue.
And Ron Kirchie, we were talking about him recently, Benjamin Dennis and I, and such an amazing LA area, Pasadena poet, who's still writing great stuff.
Yeah, probably the most overlooked great American poet. He was my teacher at Pasadena City College. I published 2 books by him.
Yeah, his work is like hilarious and poignant and smart.
Yeah.
He also wrote young adult books, if I'm not mistaken.
He has had quite a career doing that and won some prizes for his YA novels. It's
kind of amazing. That's why it's important to relook at these publications like Little Caesars and others, because there's so many writers who they, like Jim Caruso, for example, does books, make books and stuff, but somehow I always felt there should be a greater attention on certain people that doesn't happen for some reason. Yeah. Especially, I mean, I think I should be more well known, but that's another story.
Do you think in that photo that the amazing poet John Weiner's looks slightly like young Walt Disney?
Yes. I always thought so. Yeah.
Yes.
Funny.
Yeah.
I'm learning so much stuff today. Can we have the next slide, please? One of my favorite issues, and see, this is the subject matter, the overlooked and underrated.
It was the last issue. Yeah.
I love this issue. I mean, I discovered so many authors and poets from this issue that I had to track down, and what a great issue. And unusual, well, not unusual, but You really put the focus on this. On
I didn't edit it. It was guest edited by this poet named Ian Young.
Huh.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Great book.
Thank you.
I noticed the naked Iggy Pop issue is not in the lineup. Too bad. That was a cute picture.
The best cover ever, best Little Caesar cover ever.
Was
What
that
makes
a
you think it's not
Gerard
there?
Malenga photo?
Because it hasn't shown up.
Ah, wait, I can't remember if I had it or not. Next slide, please.
There you go, Ron. It's a book by Ron Kirchie I published at Little Caesar. Yeah.
Beautiful cover. Who did the cover?
Henk Alenga, he was a Dutch designer who lived in LA. He also did the catalog for Little Caesar, which was really fantastic.
Right.
And he did Lewis McAdams' cover.
Mm-hmm.
He was like he was part of this collective, this Dutch design collective. And I think I met him through Lewis McAdams, and I really liked what he did, and he was happy to do it for very little money, so he did this one.
Next slide, please. Amy, who published The True Bride?
The painter Sam Francis, the lovely abstract. He was really interested in literature, and he started a press called Lapis, Lapis. It doesn't exist anymore, but in the beginning they did letterpress books, and this book had a cover by the amazing artist Alexis Smith, who would come to Beyond Baroque a lot. Actually, we were talking about visual artists.
Alexis was on the board of directors when I was at Beyond Baroque.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing. At one point, the entire board of directors were visual artists. And I think there's not one poet on this board, and I thought it was really interesting. It worked. It was interesting and great at the same time, and I enjoyed working with Alexis.
She's wonderful.
Yeah,
and I think that Alexis was the person who she collaborated with Karen Carson to make a first and only like Beyond Baroque T-shirt, and I wish we had a T-shirt to show you. It was really beautiful.
I have a faint memory of that T-shirt. Yeah, amazing. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite presses. And Amy, actually for all of you, can you comment on? I forgot the name of the press right now. Hanuman, thank you. Raymond Foy and Francisco Clemente, the artist.
Francisco Clemente, yeah.
And I don't have everything. I don't have this particular book, but it's interesting who they publish. I mean, they publish like New York writers and poets, and then they publish like the New York punk rock people like Patti Smith and Richard Hell, and they even have a Bob Dylan book. And then they publish like surrealists. I know they did a couple of books of Picabia, which of course I love, because I love stuff from that era in Paris. And then they did like Los Angeles. They did you, Amy. They did David Trinidad, Bob Flanagan. Am I missing anybody else?
Well, they did Dodie Bellamy. She's from San Francisco.
Right.
They did Dodie, yeah.
West Coast. So Amy, can you briefly talk about how the connection, like how did you become part of this? What was the communication like, or the relationship? I mean,
again, of all the many things countable and uncountable that the good fortune of meeting Dennis brought into my life, he knew Raymond Foy.
mm-hmm.
And so, and this is one of my only pieces of published fiction. It's actually a little short story.
Ah, beautiful.
And Raymond and Francesco Clemente did this line of books that they were printed in India, and they were tiny, like almost the size of like 2 matchbooks. They were sort of based on those little religious books that you see coming out. And so they would have amazing typos in them because they were set by people who didn't speak English.
Yes.
So sometimes letters would be like upside down or sideways. It was great. And they were on really thin paper. I love this series of books because I love a book that you can like put in a tiny pocket and carry with you any place or always like it's a little Bible, but it's literature.
Yeah, I use public transportation a lot, so this is like a perfect book for me to read on a thing. Elias Books East in Atwater Village, I believe, have the complete set or a couple of complete sets of this for anybody who wants to purchase. I am not associated professionally, but it's great that they have it there if somebody wants it. So it's it's fantastic. Next slide, please. Helter-skelter. Benjamin, can you explain again what the helter-skelter exhibit is or was?
Well, it was a big show that Paul Schimmel put on, and then that kind of was the centered around a lot of sort of like Chris Burden and Mike Kelly, and then a sort of like blossoming of Paul McCarthy into his international status. And then there were a lot of unknowns, in the exhibition. And then there was an editor, and I can't remember her name, who kind of handled all the literary work and kind of approached.
Was it Kathy Goodis?
Yeah, that's great. That is her name. And so, she did this. She wanted to have this element of writing, and so we did, I think, readings at the museum, and it was really great. Just kind of responding to the kind of overlap that was already going on.
Next slide. I think next slide is a helter-skelter related something. These are people who contribute. You probably can't read it, but I can't read it. Too small.
Like Charles Bukowski, Chris Burden, Michelle Clinton, Dennis Cooper. I mean, there's a lot of names I don't know, but huge amount of artists and writers. Raymond Pettibone, Charlie Ray, Jim Shaw, Rita Valencia, a cool writer.
This is another exhibit or publication I immediately think of Beyond Baroque when I see it, just because of the history of the people, including the visual artists. I mean, helter-skelter could happen without Beyond Baroque's presence, but I think this is a great offshoot of the Beyond Baroque aesthetic or world, that the museum or Paul Schimmel, picked up on. So it's a very important exhibit and publication, as it is itself, but also in the whole cultural Los Angeles mix of the time and its past. The next
also lace, the early lace. Mm-hmm. Because that was like a kind of clubhouse for us too, and that's where we went there all the time, and a lot of that's where the artists were. And so, I think I don't know too much about
Paul Schimmel's past, but was he more? I mean, did he go to Beyond Baroque, or was he aware of? I mean, or was it more of a lace thing that this sort of inspired him to do the show?
I think people cued him. I wouldn't be surprised if like Mike Kelly and some other people said, "Oh, you should do this" or something. I mean. Because Mike was obviously really involved with us. So,
yeah, Mike Kelly.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. So this is sort of the catalog opened up, and this is totally out of print now. I mean, it's hard to find. They had it at Art Book at Hauser and Wirth for some amount of seconds before it was snapped up. But impressive catalog. Can we have the next slide, please? Next slide.
Maybe that's the end.
Is that the end? What also I had was basically flyers that Jack Scaly brought up of readings with Benjamin and other people. And one was, I remember it was Benjamin and Amy at Art Center. And I was very impressed because everything else is sort of like a sort of flyer, hand printed. But this is like a real serious poster, right? I mean, it's a serious poster announcing Amy and Benjamin at Art Center. Do you remember the poster?
I remember they kind of would get a promising, student to make it look nice.
I was very impressed. They made it look very nice. I just like the poster aspect.
Yeah.
And then there was and then Jack had a lot of like flyers of Benjamin reading with various people. I think it was Jack Skelly, and the whole nature of doing readings at the time was very much like a music thing, like a punk rock thing, where you make a flyer and you hand it out to people, or you take it to bookstores and of that sort. And I sort of missed that sort of type of communication. When I did the film series, my wife Luna would make and design the flyers, and we used to go to film places, but also bookstores and record stores as well. And it was nice. It was like a nice, nice world. I love that sort of environment.
I think back in the day, Benjamin did this reading at this place called the Anti-Club, where he actually read and used his mom as an actor.
I was going to see that. I had a flyer that says Benjamin Weissman and mom.
Yeah, she read a lot of stories, and she was a big hit. She kind of dressed up in a really strange outfit and pretended to like drink schnapps, and kind of like read really harsh stories. And
there you go.
It was crazy. I remember Mike read that night too,
mm-hmm.
and he didn't do too many readings. It was the only time in my life where he actually kissed me.
Really? Well,
yeah.
You're an attractive man, Benjamin. I mean, it's not.
I think it was because everyone was swarming my mom, and he was caught up in the enthusiasm. And he thought I was lonely.
Bringing a mom to a show or putting it on stage that's a good thing. Yeah,
girls were saying like, I want you to be my mom.
That's good. So this is the Jack Skelly Benjamin Weissman flyer for Beyond Baroque.
That was Jack and our first reading together. And that was the night that Peter Sheldall came to that reading and took us all out for drinks. It was very exciting.
Wow. Cheap beer, swell literature. I like the swell part. That's excellent. A performance of their works on sex and violence. Yes.
I think Dana Duff made that flyer.
It's a beautiful flyer. Is there another slide? Okay, never on the roll. And this is, Dennis, you're a huge Halloween person, I know.
Yeah.
Amy and Benjamin, are you big Halloween people as well?
Less so.
Less so? I'm not much of a Halloween. I get scared easily. I have a thing, when I face fear, you're supposed to face it. When fear comes, you face it. And you should deal with it. But my whole approach to life is to run away from fear. I run really fast the opposite direction. That's how I deal with the fear aspect. So, Amy, do you share a birthday with Mike Kelly or near his birth date, or vice versa?
Our birthdays were 3 days apart. He made this flyer. That's all his
work.
Yeah.
Great. Do you remember the night? Do you remember the party?
I've tried to get amnesia about it. I remember certain things, but I think this flyer was truth in advertising. I think there was a lot of booze and drugs and all kinds of stuff going on.
Wow.
It was a very exciting party.
It says natural ways.
Yes, that's a clue. And we want liquor. Very important.
That desire was gratified.
Okay. Next slide, please. If there's the next one, okay. And this is who did the artwork on this particular?
I think that's Mike also.
That's also Mike Kelly.
And it's with Mike Kelly, Timothy S. Martin, and Benjamin, and his mom. Okay, this is the Anti-Club one. Great.
I think that's the night I met Eddie Rouchet. That he brought his mom, or his mom brought young teenage Eddie to the reading. That was the first time I ever met him. He must have been like, 15 or 16.
And his life has changed since.
And I think we were only like 25 at that time.
Right.
Approximately.
Right. And next slide, please. And this is from the Pilot Theater, presents Benjamin Weissman and Telskin, which is music.
A funny band from people from my high school.
This is like your high school gig at Pilot Theater.
Yeah, I think there was a guy in the poetry scene back then. So it thanks somebody in the notes, Ivan Roth, and I think that he was the host of that show, and he was briefly a poet that did stuff.
I remember the name. Yeah, Ivan E. Roth. Yeah, I have a memory of that name. And the Pilot Theater. Where was the Pilot Theater? Does it still exist? No,
I don't think so.
That's where they actually had theater. They had a normal theater program there, right?
And Ted Quinn of Telekin has a kind of a presence in the desert, and kind of owns the Beatnik Cafe, which has a lot of music.
Yes, I sort of know Ted through the social media world. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Next slide. If there's the next one. This is the poster I was talking about that folds out.
I remember that we each read each other's writing that night.
How wonderful. That's interesting.
I think I had it was while I was in the throes of my mad crush on Amy.
Again, totally understandable. Let me ask you a question. When you read it Beyond Baroque, you have the audience there. Is it the same audience that shows up at the Anti-Club or at the Otis Art Institute, or is it a totally different audience and a different crowd of people?
Yeah, I mean, there would be a certain little overlaps, but there was definitely like new people coming to each venue. I think that the Anti-Club was exciting because it was totally a music scene. Mm-hmm. And then that overlap was really strong. And when we did things at Lace, that was a really, art dominant audience. And then here, it had a little bit of, the art college, thing going on with it, and these were all the different parts of town too, though everyone seemed to drive everywhere, and it didn't matter if it was 20 miles away.
Now I find it very much Los Angeles, very much East Side and West Side. And including me, I don't go to the West Side that much just because of the distance and stuff like that. Then at the time, people travel around more, I feel, including me. Next slide, please.
I can't believe they charge $4 for that though.
It's it's priceless.
Like back then, that's like, $80.
Yes. Sold out, right? Standing room only. Now, this is something I presented at Beyond Baroque. I did a Louis Buñuel and Buster Keaton film program because at the time, and still, they're like my two favorite film people. But again, I wanted to have sort of a conversation of sorts between somebody like Buster Keaton and Buñuel. And that was a fun night for me. And I would do it, I think, twice every. At the time we issue a calendar, so I did it once a month, this film program. And again, thank you, Benjamin, for allowing me, or not allowing, but for being so open to have me do a film series at Beyond Baroque.
Look at how great that is, Land Without Bread.
Yeah, you got Andalusian Dog,
so
a Playhouse, and I wouldn't show it in order. I wouldn't show like the Buñuel together and the Keaton together. It would be like Andalusian Dog, then I would show the Playhouse by Buster Keaton, then Land Without Bread, and then 1 Week by Buster Keaton. So people had to watch both. I couldn't, I don't want to separate them as artists. I want to package it as one whole piece of sorts. And I think that's the last slide, right? Yes. So we got that worked up. I have a funny feeling that we probably went beyond our time, but I have to be honest, I don't care, because I'm only concerned about how much enjoyment I get for being in the presence of people. And I feel this actually, I really did feel, not under pressure, but I felt this really, really important show because it deals with people of Beyond Baroque at a certain time, a certain place, and we shared a certain occupation. And I could go on for hours. I mean, I could do like 2 hours or more on each of you if I was going to interview one-on-one. So it was kind of strange to be constrained by 45 minutes or an hour to do a show because the subject matter is huge. And I just want to say I'm very grateful and very honored to be in the presence of all three of you and to be part of Beyond Baroque's history and allowing me to do what I had to do or what I did in Beyond Baroque. And I just want to say thank you to all three of you.
Thank
and
you,
I remember you were very
Thanks,
helpful.
Tosh.
Can I throw in something? Just because this whole thing is about the poet gang, you know, of Beyond Baroque. And actually, there's a poet that's always left out, who no one ever talks about. And it was Kim Rosenfield. She was really she came in later than some of the others. Yeah. But she was like a really close ally and a member of our group. And she's just been erased from this whole thing. So I just want to say that, you know, Kim Rosenfield was a really wonderful, very young at that time. I think she was like a teenager poet, and she was really important to the group. And
And also, we didn't talk about Ed Smith, but I talked to Ed about Ed Smith with the Sherry Rose episode and with the David and Jack episode greatly. Is there anybody else you want to bring up? It's a good point to bring up. There's so many people that, you know, it's difficult.
I would say that it's was really heartening to me, at least through my tenure, is that the older generation poets who stuck through like all the generations of Beyond Baroque and were really, really supportive were Jim Crusoe and Bill Moore. They were like, you know, they went to all, you know, at least during my tenure, I mean, they were very, very there and part of it. And they were very interested in what we were doing. And that was, you know, it was great. And, you know, Jim's obviously I published a book by him. He's a great writer. Yeah. But it was nice that they stuck with, because the others all fled, but those two people stuck with us and really were interested.
That's a good question. You know, one more question. Benjamin, was there anybody in your time that you really championed? I mean, this is probably a difficult question to answer, but is there anybody that you really championed during your time period that you really happy that you presented? Of course, you're happy you present everybody, but was there anybody in your mind specifically that you thought, wow, this person's great, and I'm glad that I was able to give readings to this person? Or
there was too many to really. It was a thrill to be able to just invite people and read them, fall in love with somebody, and then write to anybody and see if they'd be willing to come. But I guess having Charles Baxter read was a big deal, and super delicious. And Dennis had published him, and to finally meet him was really a major thrill. And then I think deeper into the programming, when Raymond Carver came and did a reading, there was the great moment when Baldessari, who was in the audience, was talking with him in the lobby after the reading, and just to see gigantic, Baldessari talking to gigantic Raymond Carver, and they didn't know each other. And I was just like, wow, look at that. It was cool. Like every single second that they were standing next to each other, kind of just giggling. It was really awesome.
That's amazing.
It's kind of great when you have two different personalities in one room. This is one of the bad things about not having, there's still Beyond Baroque still exists and it still happens. But I do miss that that interaction of getting two people together in the same room. And when I was working at Book Soup, at the same time, Rod McEwen showed up, and then David Bowie showed up like 10 minutes later. And I'm thinking, I'm not even a Rod McEwen fan, but I said, wouldn't it be great if they met? I know there's a Jacques Brel connection, like Rod McEwen's a big Jacques Brel fan, and of course Bowie. And I'm gonna introduce them to each other. But I chickened out. I didn't do it. Wow. And I totally. It's my only regret in life that I didn't introduce David Bowie. I
remember seeing Sam Shepard in your bookstore and going up to him and saying and trying to get him to read it Beyond Baroque.
I remember that. Yes, I was behind the cash register when that happened. That's great. I remember that. Anyway, I think we probably have to say goodbye. So I want to thank the Hammer Museum. I want to Sabrina. I want to thank David and Jack and Sherry Rose, and I want to thank you three for allowing me to be in your presence again, because it's a great honor and pleasure. Thank you so much.
And thanks, Joe Stewart.
Thanks. Yes, thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Tosh.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tosh.
See you later.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.